truth about suffering is that inherent to our experience of the world and of ourselves, there is this sense of lack. There is this permanent sense of lack. We always missing something, and we always in this restlessness state of wanting to fulfill that need, to feel whole again, to feel complete. And we don't even notice it because it's so habitual, because it's not to say that, of course, suffering exists. Who can deny that? It's just to point to something that is so deep and so constant and so habitual that, when we are in happy times, we don't even notice that it's still there anyway.
Welcome to the Manifested Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Leandro, your well-being and nutrition coach. Today's guest is Tsering Paldron. Tsering is a Buddhist and meditator. For the past 25 years, Tsering has been traveling and teaching Buddhism and meditation. She has written a number of books on these subjects, including a children's book, The Adventures of Tashi, the Tibetan Cricket. Tsering, thank you very much for being here today.
Hi, Leandro. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to talk to you. To start our conversation, if you could please talk about Bodhicharya group and describe it and its purpose, please.
Yes, sure. Bodhicharya is an international group of people that sort of gathered around Ringu Tulku Rinpoche, who is a renowned and very respected teacher from the Tibetan Buddhism. He has been traveling all over the world for more than 20 years now, and he has been in touch with lots of people. So people naturally became interested and they gathered by themselves, and so Bodhicharya started. It's going in 35 different locations all over the world, in 13 countries, and I am responsible in running the Bodhicharya Portugal group, whereas I also travel to when I'm invited to other Bodhicharya groups in different countries, and in UK, for instance, but also in other countries. So the main purpose, of course, it has been created around the teachings of Buddhism, but there are three main aspects to the Bodhicharya groups, which are healing, which includes, of course, Buddhism as a form of deep healing, but also other activities that might help people, like nutrition, or any therapy or any sort of thing, yoga or Tai Chi, or all these things that help people find balance and heal deeply. Also helping, so there's a charities linked to the Bodhicharya groups, also helping people materially and also in the aspect of education and also health and things like this, with projects in Nepal and Tibet and all of these things. And also the harmony, which is like interfaith dialogues and promoting tolerance and dialogue and everything between different faiths and different views and so on. So that's the three main purposes, and all Bodhicharya groups are sort of set through the same. They have the same purposes and the same philosophy. But the central reason why everybody got together is Buddhism, of course, and the teachings of Ringu Tulku Rinpoche.
Thank you. In your specific case, how did you discover Buddhism? How did you come across Buddhism in the first time in your life?
Yeah, well, that was a really long time ago. I was 19. As you can see in my face, that's been quite a while. It was 1973, actually. And I traveled to, I left Portugal and traveled to Belgium. Yeah. And I was not really looking or searching for Buddhism. I didn't know much about it. I only had slightly heard about it, but I was in a deep search since a few years, search for the meaning of life or something like that. And when I came across Buddhism by chance, or maybe not, I know sometimes we think these things never happen by chance. But anyway, when I came across Buddhism, it was really like where before there was a wall on which I was kind of banging my head again and again, suddenly there was a door and there was a way, there was a possibility for something that I really hoped for, but I didn't know it existed. So that's where when I came across Buddhism, I was 19, and it totally changed my life, because since then I never stopped practicing and deepening my practice and understanding and meditation and all of that. Yeah.
Yes, and in terms, because I the little I understand about Buddhism, that there are different branches, if this is correct word. So what would be the difference between Tibetan Buddhism from other type of Buddhism, or even if there are the core values and what differentiate?
Yes. Well, it's a tradition that has 2,500 years, so there was plenty of time for diversification and things going in different directions according to the different cultures, of course. When the Buddha taught, there were no differences. I mean, he just lived for 80 years and taught for about 50 of them. So there was a lot of teachings. But and Buddhism was very successful. I mean, very popular at the time of the Buddha, and very quickly, even while he was still alive, it spread into the south of Asia, around India, Sri Lanka, and all these places were quite quickly received Buddhism. Then later on, it went to the Far East, like Japan and China and Korea and so on and so forth. And around the 7th century of this era, there was an Indian master, very renowned, that was invited by the king of Tibet to go to Tibet. So it had been already 12 centuries of Buddhism in India and all those countries. But the specific form of Buddhism that was taken to Tibet was a form of Buddhism that had not really been practiced or taken to China or Japan and so on. It was more the tantric aspect of Buddhism. I mean, Tibetan Buddhism, there is roughly 2 or 3 big distinctions in Buddhist practice. Yeah. There's what we generally call the South Buddhism, the Southern Asia Buddhism, which is the form of Buddhism that is practiced in Thailand, Sri Lanka, Burma, and all these countries of South Asia, which is more connected with the tradition of what we call Theravada. Theravada is they call themselves the ancients, or the ones who are more connected, or quite exclusively connected with the actual teachings of the Buddha himself. And then there is the Northern Asia Buddhism, which includes China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and all those places, which belong to the tradition of what we call the Mahayana. Mahayana being a later development, or a later development of Buddhism around the 4th century in India, which stresses more the aspect of compassion and wisdom. Like we could say, Theravada is more it's more based on a personal enlightenment or personal liberation, whereas Mahayana is more focused on, of course, personal liberation, but also the wish to be able to attain this freedom in order to be able to help other beings attain that wisdom themselves. So it's more, it's not to say that the other ones are not altruistic, sorry, but the Mahayana approach is more sort of clearly focused on attaining a certain level of realization in order to help other beings. Then we have what it's called Vajrayana, and Vajrayana is specific to Tibetan Buddhism. When we talk about Tibetan Buddhism, it's perhaps also interesting or important to realize that it was not only practiced in Tibet. All the Himalayan regions were actually practicing this form of Buddhism, which includes Nepal, Bhutan, and even Mongolia. So it was quite widespread. And it is also based, in philosophical terms, it's also based on the Mahayana approach, the altruistic approach, but then it has a few sort of specific characteristics in the techniques. It uses some forms of meditation, which is now normally known as Tantrism, and which are the meditation on, you can say, deities, which are not like Greek gods or anything like that. They're more like archetypes of certain enlightened qualities that we already have, and in order to sort of summon and develop them, we give them a form, and we use a mantra and use them as meditation supports. So then what Tibetan Buddhists say is that the Tibetan Buddhism is actually an integrated form of Buddhism. The practice of Tibetan Buddhism is quite an integrated form of Buddhism because it integrates the three of them. So it has a basis of Theravada in the aspect of discipline and so on. It has the heart or the aspiration of Mahayana in the form of the altruistic aspiration. And then it has the techniques and the meditation techniques of the Vajrayana. So actually, Tibetan Buddhism is a sort of how you say this, a whole, or there's a word for that. Well, anyway, it's a sort of complete form of Buddhism. Of course, maybe it's a little biased, but anyway.
Okay, so I would like to do a follow-up question here, because when you talk about South Asia, Theravada, and North Asia, Mahayana, being focused on the main core, on being focused on personal liberation or specializing on compassion, wisdom, is there any different approach on the way the Buddhism is done? Like, let's say, it's my assumption for what you said, Theravada would be more individualistic in the way of practicing, and the Mahayana more collectivist, more in group. It would be a good assumption.
Well, I must admit that I am not very familiar with the way these other traditions do practice, but actually, in all cases, there was monastics, and they would live in a group. They still do, even in Theravada. So it's more like an inner perspective, if you want. I don't think that outwardly it would manifest so much, as being more individualistic in their practice, or more collective, like living in a group or something like this. They both live in monastics, and they both can practice in different ways. What is true, and the reason why the Mahayana approach was developed in the first place, in the first centuries in India, of the first centuries of this era, was because the Theravada approach was more focused on monastics and renouncement. And so it was less open to the possibility of lay people also practicing it. Whereas this was not intent of the Buddha in the beginning. He gave his teachings to all sorts of people. Of course, he had his monks who were following them, but he also had disciples who were kings, who were courtesans, who were merchants, or, there was all sorts of people. So he never said anywhere that in order to be a Buddhist, you should be a monk. And because of that, because it was kind of closing up to that, like the only way was to be a monk, then came this this development in the first centuries of Mahayana, focusing the intention and not the way of living. See what I mean?
Yeah, it makes sense. I would like to talk about a bit, clarifying on Tantrism, but before I'll ask you a question that I think it's linked to. First of all, if I could have a definition about what meditation is, like what it's good for, something that can give me a basic understand, let's say.
Yes. Well, we can say meditation is actually aimed as, from the Buddhist point of view, okay? Yeah. From the Buddhist point of view, the final aim of meditation is to understand the nature of our mind. Not understand from intellectual point of view, but have a deep experience about the nature of our mind. But in order to do that, because we are so completely unfocused and distracted and carried away by our thoughts and emotions and all of this, in order to be able to see clearly the nature of our mind, first we have to calm our mind down. The Buddha gave this example that if you look at water of a lake, when people have walked, so all these particles of dirt in the bottom, of mud on the bottom, they are in suspension in the water and you can't see anything. It's all dark. But if you wait a little and you let those particles settle down, then the water becomes clear and you can see every little stone, everything in the bottom of the water. So the same is applicable for our mind. When our mind is, confused, stressed, agitated by all these waves of thoughts and emotions and so on, we can't see it we can't see it properly. We can't see the nature of the mind. It seems to be something completely different. So in order for us to be able to have that clarity, we have to sort of calm down the mind. And then when the clarity is there, then start observing what is the nature of mind, how does it work, and all of these things. So we say for the first purpose, the purpose of calming down the mind, then we have meditation is actually a very simple exercise. It's just training awareness, and training awareness by sort of being aware of being aware. Let's say we are aware. I'm aware that I'm talking to you, of course. But there is a difference between being aware, let's say, being conscious, and then being aware of being aware. Like when someone asks us, what are you thinking about? Or what are you thinking right now? Then you have to sort of, take a step back and actually be aware of what you were thinking. You see, it's different from just thinking. It's just knowing what you were thinking. So when you take that step back, you become like the observer of your own thoughts, of your own, not only your own thoughts, but also you are the observer of all sensations and sounds and things like this. And of course, thoughts keep coming, thoughts keep interrupting. So normally we have two ways of dealing with thoughts. Either we fight them because they are scary or we don't want to follow them, or we just follow them. And then we have this chain of thoughts that we are constantly in. So basically the process of starting training our awareness is becoming aware of being aware. Then you become aware of your thoughts and you try not to fight them nor follow them. So just when thoughts interrupt and you are carried away, you just realize that you have been carried away and bring back your awareness. And then that's where we use an object of concentration. Let's say breath, for instance, which is the most unanimous focus. You just follow your breath, like you are aware that you are breathing. And every time a thought interrupts, you just come back to the breath. Very simply, it's very simple, but it's a it's a practice that requires kind of patience, and not too many expectations. And if you do that, then you slowly train your awareness, and you become much more aware, not only in meditation, but mainly in daily life. So you are more aware of your reactions, of what is going around, and all of this.
Okay, and for a person, let's say, for most people, what would be the biggest benefit in terms of well-being? If you ask you to name one or the top three.
Okay, well, I think it helps a lot with stress, because when stress comes from being overwhelmed by all these thoughts and emotions, and mainly also inner stress I'm talking about. Of course, in our modern lives have a lot of reasons to stress, but what I have noticed for myself is that even when you are not in a situation where you have all these things that normally stress you, there's still stress, because it has become a habit. You stress even if there is no reason somehow. Anyway, it helps with stress, because then you are more when you train in meditation, your thoughts kind of slow down a little bit, so it is easier to see them. But I think mainly is when you develop awareness, then you become aware of your thoughts and emotions, and you have a certain gap. It's not like you are immediately sucked into the first thought that comes into your mind, and then you start fantasizing, oh my God, this is going to happen, and how am I going to cope with this, and if this happens, and then we build a whole drama around something that possibly will never happen. So when you slowly get this habit of taking a step back and watching yourself having these thoughts and things, you don't get so much involved. And even if you get involved, you realize you're getting involved, and then you can sort of, take that step back. So it is actually the only, I think, if you don't have this awareness of yourself, what's going inside yourself and what's going around you and so on, it's very hard, maybe even impossible, for us to change our negative habits, because we will always be in sort of autopilot mode. And when we are in autopilot, we can't see anything. We just follow our habit. And so meditation is really the key for the possibility of change, the possibility of evolution. And also then in the long run, it's also the key to understanding the nature of our mind and being free of suffering, actually.
Thank you. It was very helpful. If I go back to what you commented about Tantrism and archetypes, so do you have, is there different archetypes with different attributes that a person meditates and want to emulate in life? Or are they only positive, or are there negative archetype? Could you expand on this, please?
Yes. Well, there's no negative archetypes, because the idea is that they're all manifestations of our Buddha nature, let's say, the nature of our mind, which is perfect. Yeah. And well, that's pretty much a Buddhist concept. But they're not negative, but some of them are peaceful. Let's say it's the transformation of energies that maybe might be like say attachment, for instance, or the craving, which might take some negative form, but it's mainly it's not something entirely destructive, transforming attachment into compassion or transforming attachment into love or something like that. That's peaceful in a way. But then there are other energies which are much stronger and sometimes more destructive that need a sort of a stronger stance. How can I say? It's like a hard compassion or hard love, like we normally call where therapists call that. Sometimes in order to help someone or ourselves getting rid of a very destructive tendency, we really have to have a strong stance. It has to be something which is equally strong. And so compassion can also take a form of hard compassion, of something which is a little bit fierce in a sense, not fierce like destructive or, it's not about killing anyone or harming anyone, but it's fierce in the sense that it might be a little frightening for the person or for the tendency or for the negative tendency. It might seem a little frightening. So these archetypes, it's like, how can I say, it's a bit like if you want to get a certain radio frequency, you really have to get the number. It's like 88.5 FM transmission. So I think since everything is vibration, we are energy, and the states of mind are also energy. Our states of mind are energetic in a sense. So if we think about these deities as frequencies, energetic frequencies, the fact that they have a form and the fact that they have a mantra, it's what allows us to sort of fine-tune, and then by adopting or visualizing that form and reciting that mantra, our mind naturally starts, vibrating at the same range.
Okay.
So that's, when people hear the word tantrism, I know that there's all sorts of ideas which are absolutely not what I'm talking about, So maybe it's a word that's a bit tricky, but what I'm talking about with Tantrism is what they call the deity yoga, or, this practice of these archetypes and these energies as the main practice, the main meditation practice in this particular form of Buddhism.
Yes, it's very interesting what you talk about compassion, your comment you made about compassion. The other day I was talking to Pastor Paul Vanderklay, and we were talking, and he does lots of work with homeless people. And I was asking him, and I was follow up with this more or less the same question for you about how compassion can, from being a positive thing, going to having a harmful effect, in the terms, let's say that if you unlimited compassion without concern of other effects or consequences, and how do you balance it between compassion and wisdom in order to not create harm instead of
Yes, well, yeah, in Buddhism, it's pretty much that is a big concern, because compassion without wisdom, without even common sense, you don't have to talk about wisdom like, but compassion without common sense can be as harmful as, as no compassion, or sometimes even more. So it's very difficult to balance between these two, trying to be compassionate towards people who are really terribly damaged in terms of psychological terms or physical terms, it's extremely difficult. You really have to have a very strong stance in order to be able to do that. You have to have not only common sense, but you really have to have a clear view of and a clear understanding of the psychological things that are involved with these people. It's not so dangerous if you show compassion to someone who is really balanced but is going through a hard time. But if you want to have a compassionate action with people who are deeply wounded and deeply damaged, that's another thing, and you really have to be very careful. Not even for yourself, but you have to be very careful that your help is actually going to help and not harm. So it is very important. And in Buddhism, they say that compassion and wisdom are like the two wings of a bird. You can't fly with just one. You can't have wisdom without compassion, and you can't have compassion without wisdom. They have to be together in order for your activity to be fruitful and successful in helping others.
Okay, thank you very much. Now let's move to talk about suffering. And according to Buddhism, what are the causes of suffering and what role it has in existence?
Yes. Well, sometimes people say Buddhism is a bit pessimistic because it's always talking about suffering, but inevitably we always come to that. Actually, the first teaching the Buddha ever gave is now called the Four Noble Truths. And it's all about this. And the reason why, it's because actually we human beings, our first priority in life is not to suffer and then be happy if it's possible. But above all, what we want is not to suffer. So the Buddha didn't really, it was not an ontological or existential or anything. It was very down-to-earth search. All human beings want to end suffering. They all want to be free of suffering. So let's go and have a deep look into that, So his first, from the Four Noble Truths, the first one is actually the truth about suffering. The thing is, the word he used in Pali, which was the language he was speaking, doesn't really mean suffering. The word is dukkha, and dukkha means actually sort of insatisfaction or dissatisfaction or frustration, and it's a much deeper and much less obvious feeling. Because suffering, we all know, I'm sick or I'm in pain or, something went wrong, I lost a dear one, that's suffering. But what he was talking about is behind that, like the deep feeling that can then develop into actual what we actually call suffering. But behind that, at a very deeper and subtle level, there is this inherent sort of existential sense of frustration, insatisfaction, like feeling that there's always something missing, that we are not complete. There is this sense of restlessness because we are always searching for something. And then in that search, we create the causes, for obvious and declared suffering. See? So that's the truth about suffering that the Buddha explained is not like, it's not... it's maybe a bit disappointing because because maybe we expect something very extraordinary. But the truth about suffering is that inherent to our experience of the world and of ourselves, there is this sense of lack. There is this permanent sense of lack. We always missing something, and we always in this restlessness state of wanting to fulfill that need, to feel whole again, to feel complete. And we don't even notice it because it's so habitual, So that's why it needed to be said. you know, because it's not to say that, of course, suffering exists. Who can deny that? It's just to point to something that is so deep and so constant and so habitual that, in when we are in happy times, we don't even notice that it's still there anyway. So that's the truth about suffering. Now, I'm sure you're going to ask what's the causes of suffering.
Yes.
Because it links with each other. You can't speak about one without speaking about the other. That's the second noble truth, is what are the causes of suffering. And what they explain is that the cause of suffering is actually a misunderstanding. We don't see things as they are, especially we don't see our mind as it is. And because of that misunderstanding, we see things in a distorted way. He gave this example, maybe it helps. He gave this example of someone who might be walking in a forest, let's say at dusk. And so there's not much light. You can't see really properly, but there's still enough light to see things, but in a very sort of indistinct way. And then from afar, he sees a piece of rope that is, fell. It's there on the ground. And because perhaps there's an instant of fear or something, and because he can't see properly, he thinks that this piece of rope is actually a snake. So if it's someone who really is very much afraid of snakes, let's say, he will start building a whole fantasy around that. Fear and, all these sorts of things, which are based on a misunderstanding. He actually is not seeing reality as it is. He's seeing something that is not actually there. And so, of course, all the construction of our own inner world, if imagine with this example, if our own personal and subjective world is all built upon such a misunderstanding, it cannot give us fulfillment, because it's like walking in someone else's shoes. It's not comfortable. It's not real. It's a fantasy, but a black fantasy of our mind. And this is due to the lack of clarity we were talking about previously, with this example of the particles and so on. So that's why meditation helps. Because when you start meditating and your mind gains clarity, then slowly you can start looking and looking and looking at the start looking at the snake and slowly understand that maybe it hasn't moved for such a long time. Maybe it's not a snake, and things like this, until you really come to realize, my God, it's just a piece of rope. And I've been here, anguishing about that, but actually it doesn't exist. So it's not that simple, of course, because there are layers we have built layers and layers of solidity around this misunderstanding. But the thing is, we actually, the cause of suffering is this fundamental misunderstanding that has been often translated as ignorance, but it's not ignorance in the ordinary sense of something that you don't know, or something that you can, something that has not been told to you or anything like this. It's not ignorance in that sense. It's more like a misunderstanding. Is seeing things in a distorted way, and then building upon it a whole world and a whole drama that, of course, keeps us suffering, because it's not the reality. It's not like that. So that's it. I know it's a bit, maybe we would need much more time to go deeper, but let's say perhaps this might be enough for now.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Just to wrap up, and if I'm wrong, please just correct me. So you have what is the reality, the actual objective reality. Let's say the snake, which is not the snake, but this rope over there. There's something because of the shadow. So the personal subjective reality would interpret it as a snake or something that is dangerous, and because of it will trigger emotions of fear, anger,
Exactly.
and then act in a certain way. But if the person stops there and look closely or pay attention, and then realize that no, objectively it's not a snake but a robe. But in this case, how can suffering end? What would be the tools to help, or at least just to give like an overview of the tools necessary for the person to stop and okay, what is that? What does that mean? What does that mean for me and the situation, the relationship between myself and this? What the tools are there?
Well, the way the Buddha explained, he set that's the sort of the third and the fourth noble truth. The third is the possibility that since suffering has a cause, then there is the possibility to eliminate that cause. So it is possible to cease suffering if we eliminate the cause that creates it. It's not inherent to the human existence. It is something accidental that came because of a misunderstanding. And then the fourth is the way to. So he then explained the eightfold path and things like this, but it can be summarized in three that I think it will be easier for explanation, which is view. And here we are talking about essentially about a sort of philosophical view that is preparing us intellectually to understand the nature of things. Yeah. We are not yet capable of seeing that as a direct experience, but then if we have this intellectual understanding of the view of interdependence mainly, which means the interdependent arising, meaning that everything arises from causes and conditions and that everything is interconnected, then that's the view. So we train into understanding that view, into deepening that view, into making that view and to testing to see if that view really makes sense, if when compared to reality and how things work. Then we have meditation. We have talked about that. So meditation is getting used to the view. We have this view which is intellectual and yet not yet a direct experience. And meditation can make it real, sort of putting the view into experience through meditation. Meditation, getting used to it, getting used to be aware, getting used to see things in a more clear way, and then have the direct experience of how it feels when you see things in a clearer way. And then the third aspect is action or behavior. Then the interesting part is that normally most spiritual traditions start the other way around, They would start by saying you should not do this and you should do that, and then you progress. But for it to be, it's not to mean that it's one after the other, but for your behavior to truly change, you have to go to truly from inside, deeply, to that you become someone different and not just act differently. You understand the difference? You can act differently, but it's totally a different thing when you have become a different person, and then what you act is just a natural expression of yourself and not something that you are, trying very, very tightly to avoid or to,
Yes.
So in order for it to become natural, you have to go through first the view and then the training. And then when it settles in, then you have really transformed. And then all your behavior changes and you become a person who is unable to do harm or to, you naturally become compassionate, naturally become wise and things like this. So the training is what they call the three trainings. It's view, meditation, and action.
You train the view, meditation, and action. So you may be training on ethics, wisdom, and behavior, and
Yes.
you start from wisdom. You
Yes.
don't start from
Yes.
behavior. Yeah,
No.
as you said, as opposed, because let's say that I have a rule like some other denominations, they would focus. Okay, this is the way you should behave, and by your overt action, by your behaviors, it's implied that you have the wisdom or the ethics within you.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And by behaving in a certain way, doing A, B, C, and D, and E over the time, it's implied that you will get it.
Yes. Well, it's not implied, but it helps. It helps. I'm not saying that actually in Buddhism you're not supposed to try to cope with your most negative behaviors immediately, of course. Yeah. But in order for it to be something that that becomes ingrained, deeply ingrained in order for you, not only your behavior, but in order for you to become a different person, even when you're not paying attention, and when it's the automatic pattern that is reacting, for that you need the training in view and in meditation. Otherwise, what happens is when you are in control of yourself, then you can act very wisely and very kind. But if you're confronted with a more challenging situation, it will still be your old pattern that is going to come up. You know, and if you only focusing on the behavior, then that's when things can become very can have a very moralistic and very sort of judgmental thing that you're not a good person, or you're a sinner, or you're things like this, and then it becomes very positive, very black and white, and it can be very oppressful. So from the Buddhist point of view, of course, if you realize you're just in the beginning of your transformation and you realize that you have a very strong negative tendency, of course you should work on that, of course. But in parallel with that, you can't just limit yourself to do that. At the same time, you should really also train into this understanding of the view and then the meditation, and then at the same time you try to cope with your most destructive behaviors, but it's like everything follows in a way. But in order for the behavior to really deeply change, you really have to have the other two. Otherwise, it's just in the superficial. It's just a thin coat of varnish, And when you scratch a little bit, it will be like before, So that's it.
Okay, thank you. And what would be, from the Buddhist perspective, the basic elements that would make a life meaningful or purposeful in the same sense?
Yeah, well, actually Buddhism doesn't really have an answer for that. I mean, traditionally, I never came across any response for that. But lately, I just saw a quote that was attributed to the Dalai Lama. Nowadays, people write all sorts of things, but it might not be him who said. But anyway, feels like him because it was very simple. He just said, being happy and useful is the meaning of life. And I think it's quite, for me, it really does feel right, being happy might seem a little shallow, but actually it's not, because when we become familiar with the nature of our mind, we can recognize that naturally, when the mind is not stressed by all these wishes and hopes and fears and expectations and fears and fears and fears, when it's not troubled by all these feelings, our mind is naturally happy, naturally at ease. not happy, like jumping all over, excited.
Okay, at this point is where I stop, and I will have to ask what would be this definition, the definition of happiness.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, there's many different levels, but what I'm sort of talking here, it's more like it's more like a peaceful state of ease and enjoyment. I'm talking about something quite deep, actually, not just ordinary happiness, the happy go round, the happy go by, the person who is always joyful. And because this sometimes is very shallow, this is very superficial. It might be, What I'm talking is a much deeper sense of fulfillment and enjoyment. It's like being able to be present and fully enjoy every moment, even when the moment in itself is not specifically very pleasant, but just being fully there, with this sense of tranquility and confidence that it's temporary. It's just one moment after the other. And if you remain open to it, it's not menacing. It's not a threat, ever, So, this is a very deep, I think this is, maybe your question was not that deep, but in the context of what I was explaining, if you want, we can come back to this, but in the context that I was explaining, I think happiness in that sense is really the capacity of remaining in the present and not getting carried away with all our fears, expectations, and so on. But let's just go back to what I was explaining, because the second point was what the Dalai Lama said was he said to be happy, and what I said is that happiness is actually consistent with our own nature, with the nature of our mind. So being happy is actually much deeper than just being happy, in the ordinary sense. And then being useful. Yes, having this feeling that your place in this world, that you're not just living for yourself, but you can have a positive impact on others. Because ultimately, I think even making a sandwich becomes much more purposeful if you're doing it for someone else than if you're doing it for yourself. So it's a natural quality of human beings to feel fulfilled when you feel that you're being useful to others. So if you can join these two, I think you really have, I feel for myself, it's the meaning of life, yeah?
Yeah, so it would be having purpose would be one element, and by having purpose you would find fulfillment that would give you a level of happiness that is not hedonist but goes beyond it.
Exactly. Yeah. Very good.
Okay, good.
Nice way to put it.
Good. If you'd like to comment on your books, if someone would like to find your books or know more about your work, how can we find out about you?
Yeah, well, I am Portuguese, and I write in Portuguese. I can speak English, but writing is a bit different. So I have nothing published in English except for my children's book, which is available on Amazon. But it just came naturally because Buddhism is not so developed in Portugal, and especially not at the time when I lived many years abroad, and when I came back to Portugal in 1997, there was hardly anything. So I started giving courses and workshops and things like this, and slowly I got to understand that maybe writing a book would be helpful, for people who were, trying to understand. And also because sometimes the fact that I'm a Westerner who was in contact with all these Buddhist teachers and things, and because of the difference of culture, sometimes it helps to be able to, build a bridge between two cultures that are so different, like the Eastern and Western cultures are very different. So that's how it happened. It happened, naturally. I never ever thought about writing a book in my life, but then then it came naturally, well, it's not they're not bestsellers. For one, Portugal is quite a small country. People don't read that much, and for two, it's a subject that's it's a topic that is very specific. So, but it was helpful, I think, for some people.
Very good. And do you organize retreats as well in Portugal? If someone would be interested, okay, would like to visit your place,
Yes.
is that possible?
We don't have a space. We have a group, we call a study group. We meet every month. We rent a place and we go there. But we also do weekend retreats in a Christian monastery here. I'm in Porto, which is the north of Portugal. And there is a Christian monastery a little bit north, but 50 kilometers from here. And we organize weekend retreats, but it's all Portuguese, of course. But we also organize every year in summer what we call summer camp with Ringu Tulku Rinpoche, who comes, and people from everywhere. Many people come from UK, from Ireland, from Germany, from even places like Thailand, and people come from everywhere. And then, of course, Rinpoche teaches in English, and then there is two simultaneous translations into Portuguese and French. So then, of course, people from English-speaking people or French-speaking people can come and also enjoy. It's normally around end of July, beginning of August. But all this information can be found in the Bodhicharyaportugal.org website. So if anyone wants to check, just type Bodhicharya Portugal and you'll get there.
What is your favorite book, or the most recent, or someone memorable?
Well, yes. Well, my favorite book would be a difficult answer, but the most recent I can tell you, was it's a book that came out recently. It's called In Love with the World, and it's written by Yongye Mingyu Rinpoche. You might check that in the web. And it's a beautiful book which mixes his own personal experience as a human being in doing a 4-year retreat as a wanderer, as a beggar, which is extremely interesting. And at the same time, for him, who was always raised, like in luxury and comfort and everything like this, as a monk. And also mixes with the Buddhist teachings, and so it's really I highly recommend.
Like a movie or documentary or theater or story?
Yeah, well, that's even more difficult. But after having a bit of a thought, I think who did this movie? I think Kundung. It's the life of the Dalai Lama by famous director, but I can't remember the name anyway.
I will search it. What is your favorite hobby?
Well, that it's growing in difficulty. I don't think I have a hobby.
Okay.
But if you ask me what is the thing that I most love doing, I would say teaching. I love teaching. Yeah. It's a pleasure. It's so great that it's also something that I do. That is not my profession, but that's what I do, and I really love doing it. Yeah.
An inspirational person?
Well, it would be easy to say the Dalai Lama, but that would be, and it's absolutely true. But I also have other people who I feel very inspired. Like Ringu Tulku Rinpoche is one, and then also, of course, you I'm sure you know that they're all going to be Buddhist teachers, but then the second one is a woman, which is quite rare was quite rare in the traditional this Tibetan Buddhism. She's called Khyentse Rinpoche, and she is really someone that inspires me enormously. So you have 3 for the price of 1.
Thank you. So good, so good. A place you would like to visit?
Yeah, well, that's, I don't know. I have traveled quite a bit. Always, almost always, invited to teach Buddhism. So I've been to South Pacific, I've been to Caribbean, West Indies, Africa, several places. But I've never been to Tibet. I would like to go to Tibet, and to Japan also. But the problem is, I would like to go there, but in time and space. Like I would like to go to Japan 300 years ago.
Okay.
That's a little difficult. I don't think there's such trips don't exist.
And the last one, if you could complete. A meaningful life for me is?
A meaningful life for me is being in the present moment and feeling that I am being useful. We talked about that. It's not a surprise, yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Leandro. And I wish you all good things for your webcast and most successful and in your life and everything going well.